Thank you for joining us for today's video lesson. Over the next 25 minutes, I'm going to discuss the biggest concern of pre-retirees, and more importantly, how to address it. Let's dive right into it. 52% of affluent investors are concerned about running out of money. Now, we're going to cover many topics today, from investment strategy to planning, but it all boils down to this. Whether you have hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, the number one concern of pre-retirees is outliving their assets. And it should be. There are specific fundamentals and challenges of today's world that make planning more difficult. In fact, a recent study suggests that the average 62-year-old needs to save 29 times their annual expense needs to confidently retire. That's a daunting number, but I'm going to show you techniques that can help make it attainable. What are the specific challenges in today's world that make outliving your assets such a concern? First of all, medical advances have increased longevity. That means people are living longer and therefore need their assets to sustain a longer period of rising expenses. Secondly, within these rising expenses are medical costs. Some, such as long-term care, are growing exponentially and are difficult and expensive to plan for. Third, we have this period of longer lasting and rising expenses, yet guaranteed sources of income are going away or facing potential issues. For example, traditional pensions are becoming more and more scarce, and the future of Social Security is murky given funding issues. Fourth, without guaranteed forms of income, investment returns become more and more important. Yet the stock market is up over 330% on a total return basis since March of 2009. Future returns are predicated on current valuations and long-term growth fundamentals. Both would indicate that you should expect positive, but below long-term average projected returns. And finally, while the Susie Ormans and Kippingers of the world can provide beneficial advice, every investor is unique. The information age has led to too much information. This often leads to knee-jerk reactions and behavioral finance errors. Before I go further, let me introduce myself. My name is Peter Brunton, and I'm the Chief Investment Officer for Strategic Wealth Partners. We are a SEC registered investment advisory firm with offices in the San Francisco Bay Area, Greater New York City, and corporate headquarters in Ohio, as well as having offices in Tennessee and Maryland. I am a chartered financial analyst, which is a 3-year master's level designation focused on portfolio management, relative valuations, risk management, and economic theory. I have a master's in business administration with a focus on finance from San Francisco State University. I have a wide range of experience as a senior portfolio manager and vice president at a multifamily office trust company, as well as a large bank. In these positions, I provided customized investment portfolio management and retirement consulting for affluent and high net worth investors. And I help contribute to investment-related news outlets such as CNBC, and recently helped our Chief Executive Officer, Mark Tepper, complete his book, Exceptional Wealth. This book is focused on holistic wealth management for clients that really have outgrown cookie-cutter models. So what are you going to learn today? Well, one, the importance of having a dynamic financial plan versus a static one. You know, most advisors will sit down with you one time and build a plan. While that's beneficial, the reality is that your life is evolving. Your plan needs to evolve to make sure you're still on track. Secondly, I'm going to teach you the importance of optimizing your financial affairs. Being okay and comparing yourself to friends and peers is not good enough. The fact of the matter is that there's an optimal strategy for each pre-retiree, and it needs to be customized to your financial affairs. We're also going to discuss the number one reason that most financial plans fail and discuss how you can prevent it. 4, I'm going to give you what we call the secret sauce of investing. 5, I'm also going to teach you the best way to distribute assets from your different retirement and personal accounts during retirement. There really is an optimal way, and it makes a difference in the amount of taxes you pay. And finally, we're going to discuss why misbehaving can hurt you and why having a structured plan is so important. Given all that you're going to learn today, we're finally going to end this with a 5-step clear solution that you can take to mitigate the risk of outliving your assets. Step number one seems like common sense and overly simplistic, but it's saving more money. Unfortunately, this is a step that, as a society, we are doing a poor job of executing. However, it's not too late, and taking proactive steps can make a big difference in your asset sustainability. So why is saving money so important? First of all, it's because of longevity. You are living a lot longer and need to have a bigger asset base to offset years of expenses, especially considering that most people are not receiving the guaranteed sources of income they once did. There's a 47% chance that at least one person within a couple lives to at least 90. That means you need to prepare to live off your assets for 25 plus years. In fact, a recent study found that 67% of Americans plan to work beyond 65, but only 23% actually do. That means you need to expect to live off your assets for as much as 30 years. What's the second reason that saving money is so important? Inflation erodes the purchasing power of your assets. It's a theory that a dollar today is not worth a dollar tomorrow. Let's look at the graphic on the bottom right corner. It shows what a dollar's worth of goods and services today will buy in 10, 20, and 30 years. As we have discussed, given longevity, there is a decent chance that you will have to live off your assets for potentially 30 years. That means that your expenses could more than double over the lifetime of your retirement, and you have to compensate for that. For pre-retirees, the inflation picture can be even worse, because what's the fastest rising component of CPI and inflation? You guessed it, it's healthcare costs. Healthcare inflation has been closer to 5%, and this disproportionately affects older Americans. So, how do we combat inflation and longevity? By saving and taking advantage of compound interest. What we have here are 4 different investors with different savings patterns and risk profiles. The ending values show the amount of assets they have accumulated by the time they turn 65 and are preparing for retirement. I want to focus on Lila, who's purple, and Chloe, who is in blue. Lila began saving $10,000 per year for 30 years between the ages of 35 and 65, and she earned 6.5% on her investments. She saved a total of $300,000, and those assets grew to roughly $920,000 by the time she was 65. Chloe, on the other hand, followed the same exact pattern, yet she began 10 years earlier. Her total amount saved was $400,000, and those assets grew to roughly $1.9 million. So how is it that Chloe has more than $900,000 of additional ending assets when she only invested $100,000 more? The answer is the combination of additional savings and compound interest. With a modest tweak in savings combined with an additional 10 years of assets compounding on each other, Chloe was able to make a substantial difference in her future asset sustainability. Unfortunately, most of us are doing a poor job of saving. As this chart shows, the average historical savings rate, which is measured by the amount saved as a percentage of disposable personal income, is 8.4%. However, in 2015, the savings rate was 5.5%. So why is that? Well, we're in the middle of a tremendous bull market, and people have more confidence to increase spending on goods and services. Now, this is great for the economy, but not for retirement planning. When people see their assets rising and don't feel they need to save, they are missing out on having those additional savings continue to compound. So let's quantify the importance of savings patterns, longevity, inflation, and compound interest. All of these combined will determine your retirement sustainability. Jane and Tom are both 52 years old, plan on retiring at 62, and have $900,000 of liquid assets. They will turn on their Social Security at retirement and collect $45,000 per year. Social Security grows with an annual cost of living adjustment of 1%. Their expected total annual expenses at retirement equal $105,000 per year and are growing every year with inflation of 3%. Jane and Tom have an investment portfolio option with an expected return of 5% and standard deviation of 10. This chart depicts portfolio balances at certain ages given 4 different scenarios. The blue line represents a scenario where Jane and Tom do nothing. They don't save or invest. As you can see, their assets are exhausted by the time they turn 74. The orange line represents a scenario where they decide to invest their assets today, but do no other additional savings. Now their portfolio lasts until the end of 86. The power of compound interest is an additional 12 years. Now let's have Tom and Jane save an additional $10,000 per year until they retire, and this is represented by the gray line. This is where additional savings comes in, because now they just earn an extra 2 years of having their assets last, and the portfolio is exhausted after they are 88 years old. And finally, what if Tom and Jane were able to save $10,000 during their working years, and then can reduce their initial expenses in retirement by $10,000? As you can see with the green line, instead of running out of assets, they are actually left with over $400,000 when they turn 90. And this could be used to leave assets to their grandchildren or to charity, whatever they deem fit. Here's an important point that I want you to take away. For some of us, it might feel too late to start saving, but you have to remember that any additional savings will be compounded for years, and that makes a huge difference. Not only that, but expense reduction does the exact same thing. Okay, so hopefully I've highlighted how important compound interest is to fight inflation. But if you don't invest intelligently and avoid misbehaving, there's still a threat of outliving your assets. So step number 2 is investing intelligently. This is a study by Dalbar Inc., which tracks the inflows and outflows of assets from mutual funds. It shows the annualized return of several different asset classes and investor types over the 20-year period ending in 2015. As you can see, the average investor had a 2.1% annualized return over that time period. That's not providing the necessary growth to combat inflation. In comparison, a professionally managed 60% stock, 40% bond portfolio had an annualized return of 7.2%. Remember our charts on compound interest? That's an enormous difference on future projected balances. Why the difference? Cognitive bias. Investors buy and sell at the wrong time and without a disciplined process. They give into emotion rather than logic. What we're highlighting in this chart is the importance of not giving into fear nor trying to time the market. For the 20-year period ending in 2015, the stock market produced an annualized return of 8.2%. However, if you were to miss the 10 single best performing days of the market over that time period, that return fell to 4.5%. If you missed the 20 single best performing days, the return fell to 2%. Well, why would investors miss those days? Well, the answer is because they decided to sell at the wrong time. Of those 10 best days, 6 of them occurred within 2 weeks of the 10 worst days. When do people get emotional? It's always after the bad days. You have to clear the noise and not make moves based on fear or emotion because it will substantially affect your returns. So now that I've convinced you on the importance of discipline, compound interest, and removing emotion, let's discuss what we call the secret sauce of investing. Every asset and portfolio of assets has a different level of risk. For investors still in the accumulation phase, they can handle the ups and downs of purely being in the stock market. However, pre-retirees are about to enter the distribution phase of living off those assets. Take a look at this chart. We have a person entering retirement at 60 with $1 million of assets. They are taking out $54,000 per year, and those distributions are growing with an inflation rate of 3%. The portfolio in green had a real annualized return of 9.1%, but was subject to market volatility. The portfolio in gray, on the other hand, had a flat return of 8% and had no market volatility. As you can see, the portfolio in green was exhausted by the time the person turned 83 years old, while the portfolio in gray was still at $1 million. So how can 8% beat 9%? Well, the answer is volatility. Imagine 2008 happens and your portfolio is completely in the market. Now you're taking out your distribution on a portfolio that is down 40%. Now you have less assets exposed to the potential recovery. That's the secret sauce of investing. It's volatility control and maximizing the return per level of risk, and that is more important than absolute return. This is the biggest point I want you to take away. Minimizing volatility and maximizing risk-adjusted returns are more important than absolute returns. How do we minimize volatility, increase return per level of risk, and most importantly, smooth out returns to prevent market extremes? The answer is diversification. What we have here is 6 portfolio options using historical returns for each asset class. As you go top to bottom, the level of diversification increases. In our scenario, we have a retiree of $2 million. He or she is taking out $90,000 of withdrawals per year, and every year, those withdrawals are going through inflation of 2.5%. What's also critical is that withdrawals are being taken out quarterly, and that the portfolio is being rebalanced to targets at that time. This rebalancing helps prevent market extremes and over/under exposure to a specific asset. Take a look at Portfolio A, which represents US stocks. It had a 7.2% annualized return and a level of risk of 16.4. But what happened in 2008? This portfolio lost 41%. After 15 years, this $2 million portfolio only turned to $2.3 million, even though it had a 7.2% return. Alternatively, look at Portfolio E. It had a lower return, just shy of 7%. It includes more assets, and it was properly diversified. Therefore, its level of risk was only 8.9%, and in 2008, it was down only 24.6% instead of 41%. Despite the lower return, after 15 years, Portfolio E had a balance of almost $2.8 million. That's a difference and increase of $500,000 for a portfolio that actually had a lower return. Reducing unnecessary volatility and finding the optimal combination of assets is key to not outliving your assets. That's the secret sauce. Step number 3 is plan and plan again. If you don't have a plan or end objective, how can you gauge success? If you don't know exactly how much you need to save, how to optimize your retirement income, or find ways to reduce expenses, especially taxes, will investment performance really be enough? Will it cause you to take too much risk or not take enough risk? More importantly, what happens to your retirement picture in case of a major life event? I want to introduce you to one of the biggest tools used to create a financial plan, and that's the Monte Carlo analysis. A financial plan begins by reviewing all of your information, such as assets, liabilities, your current and future income sources, as well as your expenses. Based on this information and your personal objectives, a financial plan will forecast all of your future projected cash flow needs. The plan will then determine what the probability is of achieving a certain outcome based on an expected risk and return of your portfolio. What we have on this page is a basic example of a Monte Carlo analysis. In this case, our objective is simply not outliving assets. The Monte Carlo analysis will tell us what's the likelihood of fulfilling our goal. More importantly, it will help us evaluate different investment portfolio options, as well as different scenarios on changing savings and expense patterns. In this case, we have a 62-year-old retiree with a $1.5 million, collecting $45,000 of Social Security, and with expenses of $100,000, that growth inflation of 2.5%. We have 4 different scenarios. Under the current portfolio, we use the basic assumptions and the current expected risk and return of the existing portfolio to determine what the expected balance is of the assets at 90 years old. The 10th percentile forecasts what's the worst case scenario balance of the assets at 90. So for example, if there was multiple 2008 type scenarios. The Monte Carlo score tells us the likelihood of success. In this case, the probability of not outliving assets is only 57%. The next 3 scenarios shows us different assumptions that can change the results. The second column assumes the investor can optimize their investment portfolio to get a better level of return per level of risk. See how the score improves to 64? What if we reduce expenses or delay Social Security? The score then increases to 88%. Improving the expected balance of your assets at 90 from $240,000 to $1.4 million is massive. Increasing the probability of success from 57% to 88% is even more important. That's the power of a Monte Carlo analysis and having a financial plan. It's optimizing your affairs and getting that probability of success as high as it can possibly be. This is how the planning process works, but I want to highlight a few important things. We typically like to see a Monte Carlo score of at least 70. However, just because the Monte Carlo score when you first create the plan is 70, that doesn't mean it's always going to stay that way. The plan needs to be updated and refreshed annually or whenever major life events happens. So for example, if that score hits the red zone and falls below 70, there are steps we can take to change the composition of the portfolio or to change spending patterns that might get us back on track. But if too much time passes and that score continues to dip, it may be too late. That's the purpose of having a dynamic financial plan. It needs to evolve in order to optimize the probability of success. Spending wisely, or the lack thereof, is the #1 reason that most financial plans fail. There's a popular myth out there that the average retiree should expect to spend about 80% or so of what they are spending pre-retirement. But from personal experience, that's not true. So you need to factor in that extra vacation and also remember that inflation disproportionately affects retirees. So there's a good chance that your expenses are going to be the same in retirement as they were pre-retirement. Also, many retirees will throw out those one-time expenses, the new roof and things like that, and not count them as part of their total expenses. But the reality is that there's always a one-time expense. These expenses simply evolve into another one-time expense, and those need to be factored in. So most retirees do not want to change their spending patterns. So therefore, finding ways to reduce expenses and really the tax bill are key. Tax bracket management is determining the proper way to distribute assets from each of your different accounts in order to pretty dramatically reduce the tax bill. There's a white paper written by a few chartered financial analysts that focuses purely on tax-efficient withdrawal strategies. And from their research, they determined that you have the potential to increase the longevity of your portfolio by 6 years. That's 6 whole years by having a proper distribution strategy. Now, that is one of the most powerful tools in your arsenal to not outlive assets. Most importantly, this is in your control. This is something you can actually implement. How does this work? Many investors own 3 types of assets that they draw on to take distributions from to cover expenses in retirement. Non-taxable accounts are Roth IRAs. They grow and compound tax-free, and there are no taxes on distributions. Tax-deferred accounts are 401ks and traditional IRAs. They grow and compound tax-free. However, when you take distributions, you pay ordinary income taxes on the amount withdrawn. Taxable accounts are your personal accounts. There are no taxes on distributions, but you pay taxes on the income earned as well as capital gains on sales. Conventional wisdom is that you want to draw from your taxable and non-taxable accounts in the early years of retirement first to cover expense needs, so that you do not have to pay taxes on distributions from the tax-deferred accounts. However, this is not always the optimal solution. By 70 and a half, investors are forced to take distributions on their tax-deferred accounts. If those accounts have not been touched and are allowed to grow, that means you will have a forced tax bill. A Roth IRA gives you the most tax flexibility. It is an account that you'd want to grow as much as possible so that you can take future distributions without a future tax liability. So why exhaust it in the early years of retirement? The bottom line is that sometimes it makes sense to take taxes now and withdraw from your tax-deferred accounts. However, you have to mix and match distributions from the various accounts so that you don't enter a new and higher marginal tax bracket. A proper financial plan will determine the optimal mix to take from each entity to minimize taxes over the life of your retirement, ultimately maximizing how long your assets last. The last step is seeking professional help or determining if that's actually the right course of action. The goal of today's video lesson was to help give you the resources to come to a decision. You really have two choices. The first is to continue on the current path and do it yourself. Hopefully we have presented some valuable information to help lay the foundation. However, you only retire once, and there are consequences if the plan is not executed properly. If taking this chance has you feeling uneasy, and making sure that you do not outlive your assets is your #1 priority, but you're not sure about whether working with an advisor is the right solution, let me outline a suggestion for you. Visit our Wealthalize tool, so it's wealthalize.com/Peter Brunton, or click on the link below to begin your 10-minute financial checkup. So how this works is it's a free, no obligation assessment. It can be completed in less than 10 minutes, and it analyzes all facets of your wealth management situation. So it's going to provide you a score ranging from 0 to 100, which measures the overall effectiveness of how well you're managing your wealth. Additionally, upon completion, you will receive a PDF which explains your score, as well as it provides a SWOT analysis. So that's your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of your situation. This is really a critical first step to securing your retirement. So start your assessment today. And you can do that by clicking on the link below or visiting wealthalize.com/Peter Brunton. Thank you very much for joining us.